There was once a very special TV show called Soul Train that changed everything. No other show in America ever had such a big effect on how people thought about music and dancing. But then in 2006, the show suddenly stopped and never came back. Nobody really knew why it ended so quickly except that there was one last episode that was filmed but never shown on TV. This is the story of what happened. Let me tell you about a man named Don Cornelius who was born in 1936 in Chicago. When he was growing up, black people and white people had to live separately because of unfair laws. Before Don worked on TV, he had many different jobs like being a traffic cop and selling things to people. In 1966, he went to school to learn about TV and radio, and soon got a job at a TV station in Chicago as a news reporter. While working at the TV station, Don had a great idea. He wanted to make a music show just for black people because there weren't any shows like that on TV. He called his show Soul Train, and it first aired on August 17, 1970 in Chicago. The show had live music, dancing, and local singers performing. People loved it right away. Just over a year later, on October 2, 1971, Soul Train started showing on TV stations all across the country. Big companies like Sears and Johnson Products gave money to help the show keep going. The show had amazing music, colorful clothes, and really cool dance moves that made everyone want to watch. During the best years of Soul Train, all the most famous singers came on the show. James Brown, Aretha Franklin, Marvin Gaye, Michael Jackson, and the Jackson 5 all performed on the show. Later, other stars like LL Cool J and Mary J. Blige also appeared. But it wasn't just about the singers. The show also helped dancers become famous. Some dancers like Rosie Perez and Jody Watley became well known because of Soul Train. There was even a dancer named Jeffrey Daniel who taught Michael Jackson how to do the moonwalk dance. One of the most famous parts of Soul Train was called the Soul Train line. This was when all the dancers would make two lines facing each other, and then people would take turns dancing down the middle, while everyone watched. Each person would show off their own special dance moves. It was like a dance contest where everyone got to be the star. Soul Train was more than just entertainment. It was a place where black people could see themselves on TV looking good and having fun. For people watching at home, it became something they looked forward to every week. For the people who got to dance on the show, it could change their whole life and make them famous. Don Cornelius wasn't just the host of the show. He was also the boss who decided everything that happened on Soul Train. He was in charge of what music was played, what the dancers wore, and how the whole show looked. Don was always very calm and serious, which made Soul Train different from other music shows. He believed that TV should be for everyone, not just white people, and that black culture should be shown in a good way. For more than 30 years, Soul Train made over 1,000 episodes. It became the longest-running music show on TV ever. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, millions of people watched the show every week. Companies that sold makeup and clothes to black people loved to advertise on Soul Train because they knew so many people were watching. The show became so popular that they started having Soul Train awards, fashion shows, and selling Soul Train products. Don Cornelius became one of the most important people in black entertainment. In 1971, Life magazine said he was one of the 100 most important people in America. But when something becomes really famous, it also faces problems, and Soul Train was about to have some big troubles. Don Cornelius was very strict about his show. He controlled everything that went on TV and even told the dancers how to dress and move. Rosie Perez, who danced on the show for several years, remembered that Don didn't allow dancers to do moves that were too suggestive or that didn't fit with what he thought the show should look like. Once she was told to change how she danced because Don thought it didn't match the show's style. Many dancers who performed on Soul Train never got paid any money for being on the show. They thought that just being on national TV was payment enough because it could make them famous. But later, some of these dancers felt like they had been used because the show made money from their dancing and creativity, but they got nothing. The biggest problem came when hip-hop music started getting really popular in the late 1980s. Don Cornelius didn't like hip-hop music. He thought it showed bad things about black people, like violence and bad language. In 1992, he said that he didn't want his show to play music that didn't represent anything positive. This made a lot of people angry. Many musicians and people in the music business said that Don was old-fashioned and didn't understand what young people liked. New shows like Yo! MTV Raps and Rap City on BT started playing hip-hop music that Soul Train wouldn't play. Famous rappers like Tupac, Nas, and Snoop Dogg almost never appeared on Soul Train. So, young people started watching other shows instead. Because Soul Train wasn't playing the music that young people wanted to hear, fewer and fewer people started watching. In the early 1980s, over 4 million people watched the show every week. But by the early 2000s, only about 2 million people were watching. TV stations started moving Soul Train to worse time slots or replacing it with newer shows. In 1993, Don Cornelius decided to stop being the host of Soul Train. After 23 years, new hosts like Maestro Clark, Shamar Moore, and Dorian Gregory took over, but none of them had the same special feeling that Don had brought to the show. They tried to make the show better by changing the stage, getting new hosts, and inviting more hip-hop artists, but nothing really worked. The show felt old and tired compared to newer music shows. Between 2003 and 2006, Soul Train started making fewer episodes each season, and many of the people who worked on the show quit or moved to other jobs. It cost a lot of money to make the show, but not enough people were watching, so the people who paid for the show started wondering if it was worth it. Don Cornelius stopped going to public events and rarely talked to reporters anymore. The show that had once made him famous and proud now seemed like something from the past. Soul Train kept airing every week, but it wasn't important anymore. New singers didn't want to perform on it. New dancers didn't stay long, and the show felt stuck in the past. Then in 2006, something happened during the filming of what would be the last episode ever. And after that, Soul Train never came back. In March 2006, Soul Train was supposed to film just another regular episode in Los Angeles. On paper, it looked like any other day of filming, but people who were there said that everything felt wrong from the beginning. The crew had been changed at the last minute. The list of guests was messed up, and the people in charge didn't seem to know what they were doing. Some people said that Don Cornelius was backstage that day, even though he wasn't officially working on the show anymore. People who had worked with him for a long time said he was clearly unhappy with how the show had changed from what he originally created. The episode was supposed to feature a young hip-hop artist, but everything started almost an hour late because the artist's managers were arguing with the TV crew about something. A person who used to work on the show said that the performance had things in it that crossed the line of what Soul Train had always stood for. The dancing, costumes, and visuals were too provocative and didn't match the family-friendly image that Don had always wanted for his show. The situation got so bad that Don Cornelius reportedly told everyone to stop filming and called an emergency meeting with the companies that helped put Soul Train on TV stations across the country. One of the major companies, Tribune Entertainment, decided to stop working with Soul Train shortly after this meeting. Without this company's help, Soul Train couldn't continue broadcasting to TV stations across America. Within 3 weeks of that filming day, more than 40% of the local TV stations that showed Soul Train stopped airing the show. No official announcement was ever made about the show ending, but people in the TV business understood that this was effectively the final episode. The Soul Train website stopped being updated. TV networks put other shows in Soul Train's time slot and the production schedule was cancelled forever. Soon after, several news reports started talking about this buried episode as the main reason why Soul Train ended. Even though the episode was never shown on TV, some footage from that day still exists with former staff members. Fans on social media started calling it a cursed performance, and discussing what might have happened that day. This controversial episode didn't just mess up one day of filming. It marked the quiet end of one of the most famous TV shows in American history. But the consequences of that day went beyond just the show going off the air. It damaged the illustracy that Don Cornelius had spent his whole life building. Right after Soul Train went off the air, the media stopped talking about it, and Don Cornelius refused to do any interviews about what happened. In 2007, he appeared on a local radio show just once and only said, "I think it went far enough." After that, he almost completely disappeared from public life. Many people believed he felt betrayed by the very system he had once controlled when other people took his show in a direction he no longer recognized. While the public remained confused about why the show ended, some former dancers and performers started sharing their thoughts. Rosie Perez called the show's sudden end an unnamed sadness. Dorian Gregory, who was the host during the final years, admitted that no one on the team had been told clearly what was happening. Many people only realized the show was over when the filming schedule disappeared from the computer system. Independent reporters started investigating what happened to Soul Train. A 2008 article in Vibe magazine said that Soul Train wasn't cancelled because not enough people were watching it, but because the trust between the people making the show had fallen apart. The Soul Train Awards, which had been happening every year since 1987, continued but were separated from the original TV show. Even though Don Cornelius had created the awards, control was given to BT in 2009. The new award shows had a more modern style, and rarely mentioned the golden years of the original show. This made longtime fans feel even sadder, as if an important part of pop culture had been erased without explanation. Meanwhile, old Soul Train episodes started appearing on the internet. People uploaded VHS recordings and performance clips from the 1970s and 1980s to YouTube, and these videos got millions of views. A new group of fans emerged, mostly young people who had never watched the original show, but were attracted to its music, fashion, and classic performance style. However, the final years and the turbulent 2000s remained largely unspoken about. What stood out was the series of personal problems that followed Don Cornelius after the show ended. In 2008, he was arrested for domestic violence, though he didn't go to jail. In 2012, Don Cornelius died by suicide at his home in Los Angeles, leaving behind many unanswered questions. The Los Angeles Times wrote in a memorial piece that even though he was a pioneer who broke new ground, Cornelius left the main stage in the quietest way possible. After his death, TV historians began looking at the entire journey of Soul Train again. Some called it a fragmented legacy, while others believed the show had done what it was supposed to do historically, and its quiet ending was just the natural way things decline. But what remained undeniable was that the 2006 broadcast shutdown was still surrounded by unresolved mysteries. Some people called it the Soul Train curse, a phrase that was more symbolic than literal. But when looking at what happened to the people who had been part of the show for a long time, from dancers to its founder, the sense of an uneasy ending feels real. The emotional pain, more than any financial loss, was what many former staff members still carried heavily. Even though it ended quietly, the legacy of Soul Train continues to shape culture both artistically and in collective memory. And it is these unfinished pieces that have led to efforts to preserve its legacy in new forms. Nearly 20 years after it disappeared from television, Soul Train has not been forgotten. Instead of being left in the past, the show has become the subject of revival in many different ways. From documentaries and TV dramas to museum exhibitions, each of these works confirms one thing. The influence of Soul Train still beats through popular culture, especially within the African American community. In 2019, BT announced its first full-length biographical TV series about Don Cornelius's life called American Soul, starring Cinqua Walls as Cornelius. The series showed the show's early days during a turbulent time in American society. While some parts were dramatized, the show explored tensions that the general public had never known about, such as the internal fight to preserve black identity within a television industry controlled by white executives. Though it didn't directly address the fateful 2006 taping, American Soul captured the intense pressure behind the show's glamour. Museums and cultural exhibitions began, including Soul Train and heritage collections. The Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture now holds various artifacts from the show, including original costumes that were once seen on air. During scholarly discussions, researchers argued that Soul Train should be considered a cultural treasure worthy of preservation, much like Motown music or the social art movements of the 1960s and 1970s. YouTube became a place for collective memory. Thousands of performance videos, behind-the-scenes clips, and interview footage were reconstructed. Some from personal archives, others from local TV stations that once aired the show. Audiences born after 2000, those who never experienced the show firsthand, have become a new generation of fans. They copy the choreography, recreate the fashion, and even host themed parties inspired by the Soul Train line. On social media, the hashtag Soul Train Challenge went viral in 2021. Young artists like Lizzo Anderson .Paak and her took part, posting videos of themselves dancing in the show's classic style. Some grown-ups even held costume competitions themed around the 1970s to honor the show. From a historical standpoint, many scholars are now calling for a complete restoration of the series from 1971 to 2006. A number of tapes, especially from the early years, have been digitally cleaned up and made available on streaming platforms, but the final seasons remain largely untouched. The last episode, taped in 2006, though never destroyed, has still never been released to the public. Many believe it will never be officially published due to legal and content problems. The legacy Don Cornelius left behind is no longer measured by the number of episodes that aired, but by how the show defined a concept. A music program not just for entertainment, but as a cultural statement. Soul Train was the first place where Black Americans saw themselves on national TV in their clothes, their dances, their music. It was a rare form of power, especially during an era still marked by racial separation in the early 1970s. The sudden silence of 2006 could not erase that. On the contrary, it turned Soul Train into an interrupted icon. And it is that incompleteness that fuels the public's desire for answers. What remains is more than performance footage. It is a shared memory for generations. Those who danced to Curtis Mayfield sat in front of the TV on Saturday afternoons and believed there was a place on screen where Black dreams were allowed to exist. Though Soul Train ended nearly 20 years ago, the values it left behind remain vivid in memory and popular culture. The unaired episode may forever stay in the shadows, but the light Don Cornelius ignited continues to spread. That light is not only the legacy of a television program. It is a statement of identity, voice, and presence for a once overlooked community. And sometimes what never aired is what history remembers.